All right, we're back. We're in Plato's Republic, Book 4. This is our Part 3. We're listening to the LibriVox version read by Bob Neufeld, and we're going to hopefully finish up Book 4 today. So, if you haven't caught up with where we're at, I'm going to post the full playlist down here in the description, and check out the previous video for context. So let's get right to it.
No more than you can say that the hands of the archer push and pull the bow at the same time. But what you say is that one hand pushes and the other pulls. Exactly so, he replied. And might a man be thirsty and yet unwilling to drink? Yes, he said, it constantly happens. And in such a case, what is one to say? Would you not say that there was something in the soul bidding a man to drink, and something else forbidding him, which is other and stronger than the principle which bids him?
Okay, so we're talking about the parts of the soul, and we're trying to determine in this section whether it's one soul which desires various different things, or whether the soul has parts, in this case, 3 parts, and those different parts can act on the individual in a different way. So perhaps one part of the soul might be desiring to drink. This is the example we're getting. And another part that avoids drink for some other reason. So the point that Plato was making here is that there are 3 parts to the soul, and we're going to find out what they are and what they do.
I should say so. And the forbidding principle is derived from reason, and that which bids and attracts proceeds from passion and disease? Clearly.
So this is setting the 2 parts against each other, the reasonable side, the thinking, the brain, that sort of thing, versus the appetitive side, the bodily desires.
Then we may fairly assume that they are two, and that they differ from one another. The one with which a man reasons we may call the rational principle of the soul. The other we may call the rational principle of the soul. The other, with which he loves and hungers and thirsts and feels the flutterings of any other desire, may be termed the irrational or appetitive, the ally of sundry pleasures and satisfactions. Yes, he said, we may fairly assume them to be different. Then let us finally determine that there are 2 principles existing in the soul. And what of passion or spirit? Is it a third or a...
So the question now is, okay, we have 2. We have the rational and we have the appetitive. Spirit is what he's giving. That's going to be your emotions, more or less. Is that part of one or the other, or is it its own part of the soul?
Akin to one of the preceding. I should be inclined to say akin to desire. Well, I said, there is a story which I remember to have heard, and in which I put faith. The story is that Leontius, the son of Algleion, coming up one day from the Piraeus, under the north wall on the outside, observed some dead bodies lying on the ground at the place of execution. He felt a desire to see them, and also a dread and abhorrence of them. For a time he struggled and covered his eyes, but at length the desire got the better of him, and forcing them open, he ran up to the dead bodies, saying, "Look, ye wretches, take your fill of the fair sight."
So here we have 2 parts of the soul that are sort of at war with each other in this Leontius's tale. Basically, he comes upon some dead bodies, and his higher self, his intellect is saying, you don't need to look at that, just walk on by. But there's another part that really wants to see dead bodies, like one of those you can drive past a car crash, that sort of thing. And so there are 2 parts of this individual that are competing with one another. And just like the same situation with the drink, if their 2 parts are pushing the same thing in different directions, that means there must be, they must not be the same thing.
I have heard the story myself, he said. The moral of the tale is that anger at times goes to war with desire, as though they were two distinct things. Yes, that is the meaning, he said. And are there not many other cases in which we observe that when a man's desires violently prevail over his reason, he reviles himself, and is angry at the violence within him, and that in this struggle, which is like the struggle of factions in a state, his spirit is on the side of his reason? But for the passionate or spirited element to take part with the desires when reason decides that she should not be opposed, is a sort of thing which I believe that you never observed occurring in yourself, nor, as I should imagine, in any one else. Certainly not. Suppose that a man thinks he has done a wrong to another. The nobler he is, the less able he is to feel indignant at any suffering, such as hunger or cold, or any other pain which the injured person may inflict upon him. These he deems to be just, and, as I say, his anger refuses to be excited by them.
Okay, so here you have a situation where something bad is happening to someone in consequence for something that they've done, so they're being punished more or less. And if the person's intellect, if they believe that the punishment is just, then they're not going to be angry about that punishment. Whereas if the intellect does not um, concede that it was a just punishment, if they think it's an unjust punishment, then they will be angry. And so again, this is just sort of demonstrating that there are these two separate parts of the individual that can agree and they can disagree.
True, he said. But when he thinks that he is the sufferer of the wrong, then he boils and chafes, and is on the side of what he believes to be justice. And because he suffers hunger or cold or other pain, he is only the more determined to persevere and conquer. His noble spirit will not be quelled until he either slays or is slain, or until he hears the voice of the shepherd, that is, reason, bidding his dog bark no more. The illustration is perfect, he replied, and in our state, as we were saying, the auxiliaries were to be dogs, and to hear the voice of the rulers, who are their shepherds. I perceive, I said, that you quite understand me. There is, however, a further point which I wish to consider. What point? You remember that passion or spirit appeared at first sight to be a kind of desire. But now we should say quite the contrary, for in the conflict of the soul, spirit is arrayed on the side of the rational principle. Most assuredly. But a further question arises.
Okay, so they've made the distinction between the appetite and the spirit, or like the emotions, basically. And now they're going to see if they can make that same distinction between the intellect.
Is passion different from reason also, or only a kind of reason? In which latter case, instead of three principles in the soul, there will be only two, the rational and the concupiscent. Or rather, as the state was composed of three classes, traders, auxiliaries, counsellors, so may there not be in the individual soul a third element which is passion or spirit, and when not corrupted by bad education, is the natural auxiliary of reason.
So let's also remember the point of the passions, in Plato's view, is to support the reason. So here we have the auxiliaries supporting the guardians, but in the individual, it's our emotions that are supposed to come alongside the truth, the things that we know, and give us basically that motivating force to act upon the things that we know. And sometimes these two parts can be misaligned. So you can be angry at something for the wrong reasons, or you can not be feeling the right things when you know true things. So if these two parts of the soul are aligned, then they sort of work together in creating action and creating things happening. Whereas if they're not, then we run into problems.
Yes, he said, there must be a third. Yes, I replied, if passion, which has already been shown to be different from desire, turns out also to be different from reason. But that is easily proved. We may observe even in young children that they are full of spirit almost as soon as they are born, whereas some of them never seem to attain the use of reason, and most of them late enough. Excellent, I said. And you may see passion equally in brute animals, which is a further proof of the truth of what you are saying. And we may once more appeal to the words of Homer, which have already been quoted by us. He smote his breast, and thus rebuked his soul. For in this verse Homer has clearly supposed the power which reasons about the better and worse to be different from the unreasoning anger which is rebuked by it.
So your intellect can actually rebuke your passions, and that proves again that they're different things.
Very true, he said. And so, after much tossing, we have reached land, and are fairly agreed that the same principles which exist in the state exist also in the individual, and that they are three in number. Exactly. Must we not then infer that the individual is wise in the same way, and in virtue of the same quality which makes the state wise? Certainly. Also, that the same quality which constitutes courage in the state constitutes courage in the individual, and that both the state and the individual bear the same relation to all the other virtues? Assuredly. And the individual will be acknowledged by us to be just in the same way in which the state is just? Well, that follows, of course. We cannot but remember that the justice of the state consisted in each of the three classes doing the work of its own class. We are
Okay, so justice in the republic, in the ideal state, is each of the three classes doing what they're supposed to be doing. You have the working class, the auxiliaries, and the guardians, and each of them functioning in the way they're supposed to is justice. So now the the individual is seen to have three parts: the intellect, the emotions, and the appetite. And we're going to see that justice in the individual, according to this early definition, is when those three parts work in harmony.
not very likely to have forgotten, he said. We must recollect that the individual in whom the several qualities of his nature do their own work will be just, and will do his own work. Yes, he said, we must remember that too. And ought not the rational principle, which is wise and has the care of the whole soul, to rule, and the passionate or spirited principle to be the subject and ally? Certainly. And, as we were saying, the united influence of music and gymnastic will bring them into accord, nerving and sustaining the reason with noble words and lessons, and moderating and soothing and civilizing the wildness of passion by harmony and rhythm. Quite true, he said. And these two, thus nurtured and educated, and having learned truly to know their own functions, will rule over the concupiscent, which in each of us is the largest part of the soul, and by nature most insatiable of gain. Over this they will keep guard, lest, waxing great and strong with the fullness of bodily pleasures, as they are termed, the concupiscent soul, no longer confined to her own sphere, should attempt to enslave and rule those who are not her natural-born subjects, and overturn the whole life of man.
Okay, so let's just clarify this real quick. The concupiscent is the appetitive side of the soul, and that is the part that desires bodily things. In this case, it's typically food and drink. Think about alcohol, sex, even stuff like rest. When the body is telling you it wants something, that's the side of the soul. And when that side is calling the shots, a person can typically deteriorate very quickly. So you need the rational and the emotional parts of the soul to go to I don't think I want to say go to battle against, but to rein in those desires. Um, and that happens. I mean, clearly the intellect can do this in many ways. You can say, oh, it's not good for me to eat that thing, or it's not good for me to X Y Z that my body wants. I want to sit down on the couch, but I should go exercise. And likewise, the emotional side can do something very similar. When let's just say you do kind of let yourself go, and you look at yourself and you're kind of ugly and fat, and you're sort of repulsed by that, by the thing that you're seeing in yourself, and that emotional reaction helps you to make a change. That's the way that these parts of the soul can interact in reining in the appetite.
Very true, he said. Both together will they not be the best defenders of the whole soul and the whole body against attacks from without, the one counseling and the other fighting under his leader and courageously executing his commands and counsels? True. And he is to be deemed courageous whose spirit retains in pleasure and in pain the commands of reason about what he ought or ought not to fear. Right, he replied. And him we will call wise who has in him that little part which rules and which proclaims these commands, that part too being supposed to have a knowledge of what is for the interest of each of the three parts and of the whole. Assuredly. And would you not say that he is temperate who has these same elements in friendly harmony, in whom the one ruling principle of reason and the two subject ones of spirit and desire are equally agreed that reason ought to rule and do not rebel? Certainly, he said, that is the true account of temperance, whether in the state or individual. And surely, I said, we have just explained again and again how and by virtue of what quality a man will be just. That is very certain. And is justice dimmer in the individual, and is her form different, or is she the same which we found her to be in the state? There is no difference in my opinion, he said, because if any doubt is still lingering in our minds, a few commonplace instances will satisfy us of the truth of what I am saying. What sort of instances do you mean? If the case is put to us, we must not admit that the just state, or the man who is trained in the principles of such a state, will be less likely than the unjust to make away with a deposit of gold or silver. Would any one deny this? No one, he replied. Will the just man or citizen ever be guilty of sacrilege or theft, or treachery either to his friends or to his country? Never. Neither will he ever break faith where there have been oaths or agreements.
So he's just going over the just man or the just state. They're not going to do these things: steal, do sacrilegious stuff, betray friends or country, that sort of thing.
Impossible. No one will be less likely to commit adultery, or to dishonor his father and mother, or to fail in his religious duties. No one. And the reason is that each part of him is doing its own business, whether in ruling or being ruled. Exactly so. Are you satisfied, then, that the quality which makes such men and such states is justice, or do you hope to discover some other? But not I, indeed. Then our dream has been realized, and the suspicion which we entertained at the beginning of our work of construction, that some divine power must have conducted us to a primary form of justice, has now been verified? Yes, certainly. And the division of labor which required the carpenter and the shoemaker and the rest of the citizens to be doing each his own business and not another's, was a shadow of justice, and for that reason it was of use? Clearly. But in reality, justice was such as we were describing, being concerned, however, not with the outward man, but with the inward, which is the true self and concernment of man. For the just man does not permit the several elements within him to interfere with one another, or any of them to do the work of others. he sets in order his own inner life, and is his own master and his own law, and at peace with himself. And when he has bound together the three principles within him, which may be compared to the higher, lower, and middle notes of a scale, and the intermediate intervals, when he has bound all these together, and is no longer many, but has become one entirely temperate and perfectly adjusted nature, then he proceeds to act, if he has to act, whether in a matter of property, or in the treatment of the body, or in some affair of politics or private business, always thinking and calling that which preserves and cooperates with this harmonious condition.
I want to just interrupt this here. It's a very long paragraph, but basically all he's saying is that once you have the virtues, particularly in this case justice and temperance, in the individual, he's going to act well. He will live in harmony with himself. The three parts of his soul will be in one accord, and he will act well.
Just and good action, and the knowledge which presides over it, wisdom, and which at any time impairs this condition, he will call unjust action, and the opinion which presides over it, ignorance. You have said the exact truth, Socrates. Very good. And if we were to affirm that we had discovered the just man and the just state, and the nature of justice in each of them, we should not be telling a falsehood. Most certainly not. May we say so, then? Let us say so. And now, I said, injustice has to be considered. Clearly. Must not injustice be a strife, which arises among the three principles of meddlesomeness and interference, and rising up of a part of the soul against the whole, an assertion of unlawful authority, which is made by a rebellious subject against a true prince, of whom he is the natural vassal? What is all this confusion and delusion but injustice, and intemperance, and cowardice, and ignorance, and every...
So now we're talking about injustice, and so if justice is each part of the soul doing what it's supposed to be doing, injustice is when there's some kind of disharmony or when there's an issue where the part that's not supposed to be ruling is in charge.
form of vice. Exactly so. And if the nature of justice and injustice be known, then the meaning of acting unjustly and being unjust, or again of acting justly, will also be perfectly clear. What do you mean? He said. Why, I said, they are like disease and health, being in the soul just what disease and health are in the body. How so? He said. Why, I said, that which is healthy causes health, and that which is unhealthy causes disease. Yes. And just actions cause justice, and unjust actions cause injustice? Well, that is certain. And the creation of health is the institution of a natural order, and government of one by another in the parts of the body, and the creation of disease is the production of a state of things at variance with this natural order. True. And is not the creation of justice the institution of a natural order, and government of one by another in the parts of the soul, and the creation of injustice the production of a state of things at variance with the natural order?
So just to recap, justice is when things are working the way they're supposed to, and injustice is when they're not. He's talking about this natural order. So when things are operating as they should.
Exactly so, he said. Then, virtue is the health and beauty and well-being of the soul, and vice the disease and weakness and deformity of the same. True. And do not good practices lead to virtue, and evil practices to vice? Assuredly. Still, our old question of the...
So we're getting back to the big question as to whether it's better to be just or unjust, whether it's better to be virtuous or vicious, and well, just a little spoiler alert here, we're not going to get the answer just yet.
Comparative advantage of justice and injustice has not been answered. Which is the more profitable, to be just and act justly and practice virtue, whether seen or unseen of gods and men, or to be unjust and act unjustly, if only unpunished and unreformed? In my judgment, Socrates, the question has now become ridiculous. We know that when the bodily constitution is gone, life is no longer endurable, though pampered with all kinds of meats and drinks, and having all wealth and all power. And shall we be told that when the very essence of the vital principle is undermined and corrupted, life is still worth having to a man, if only he be allowed to do whatever he likes, with the single exception that he is not to acquire justice and virtue, or to escape from injustice and vice, assuming them both to be such as we have described?
Okay, so he does sort of concede here. Um, the reason I say we're not going to get a resolution is because we still have most of the book to go, and this question is going to loop around again. But I guess there is this concession here that if an individual's soul, if their actual constitution is at odds with itself, and if it's not in harmony, then that person is going to be unhappy. So here we argue that the vicious man, the unjust man, is critically hindered from wholeness.
Yes, I said. The question is, as you say, ridiculous. Still, as we are near the spot at which we may see the truth in the clearest manner with our own eyes, let us not faint by the way. Certainly not, he replied. Come up hither, I said, and behold the various forms of vice, those of them, I mean, which are worth looking at. I am following you, he replied. Proceed. I said, the argument seems to have reached a height from which, as from some tower of speculation, a man may look down and see that virtue is one, but that the forms of vice are innumerable, there being four special ones which are deserving of note. What do you mean? He said. I mean, I replied, that there appear to be as many forms of the soul as there are distinct forms of the state.
All right, so this is gonna we'll get into this, as we go forward. But basically, the state and the individual are being compared again. There are five parts to each. I'm gonna flip my other hand so we can keep the thumbs where they on the right side. So there are five basically degradations. So if we start at the top, we use my thumbs here. If we start at the perfectly well ordered state and the well ordered soul, that is good. That is the way it's supposed to be. But as things change and as things get corrupted, they kind of reduce into a different type, a different type, a different type, until finally they're at a very, very bad state, which we're going to get to later. So there are four stages below the ideal state. So that's why there are five. One is the ideal state, the ideal soul, and then each of the four are different stages of corruption of that thing.
How many? There are five of the state and five of the soul, I said. What are they? The first, I said, is that which we have been describing, and which may be said to have two names, monarchy and aristocracy, accordingly as rule is exercised by one distinguished man or by many. True, he replied. But I regard the two names as describing one form only. For whether the government is in the hands of one or many, if the governors have been trained in the manner which we have supposed, the fundamental laws of the state will be maintained. That is true, he replied. End of Book 4.
End of book 4. So we're going to be getting into that. We're going to be getting into the parts of the state and the parts of the individual. If I remember correctly, though, there's a bit of an excursus here before we actually get to that. So I think it might take a little while, but we'll get to it. There might be some stuff in between. So here's the end of this, and I will see you in the next one.